All right. I grew up in Cork, but I wasn't born there. I was born in England, and my parents, who were Irish, they got divorced when I was about 5.5, coming up on 6. And my mum went back to Cork, and I went with her, obviously. And we ended up living back at my nan's, my mum's mum and dad's house. It was a little terrace house on the north side of the city, on a street that was just full of grandparents. There wasn't anyone of my age that was living there, apart from one guy who was my best mate at the time. And he lived a few doors down. But other than that, it was just me and him on this little street that was very quiet, apart from the weekends when everyone's sons and daughters would come up with their kids. And this little house had raised 12. My mum had 11 siblings. And it was a tiny little house, one of those old corporation houses that was probably built in the 30s. When I lived there, there was myself, my mum, my nan, my granda, my aunt Brenda, and my uncle Kevin. My mum always said that if she'd known she was going back to Cork, she never would have called me Kevin. So there was Big Kevin and I was Small Kevin. And oh God, I remember there was a big palaver about me being called Small Kevin at one stage, where it was like they had to transition away from calling me Small Kevin into calling me Normus Kevin, which is my mum's name. Anyway, this was in the late 80s. And obviously I had an English accent, so I stood out already. And it was also a time in Ireland when divorce was illegal. So I was like the only one that I knew of who came from a broken home. I felt like a complete oddball for a few reasons. School for me was quite traumatic at that time because I was trying to fit in, but every time I opened my mouth, I stood out, and it was just sort of everything I was saying was the wrong thing. I remember one day I said, "Shall I pull down the blinds?" And it was like I had curtsied in front of everybody. But I remember one day a substitute teacher came in and she asked us to draw our families. And everybody got to work and they all started like taking out their pencils and paper and drawing their houses and their mum, their dad, their dog, their brother, their sisters. And while everyone's head was down, I beckoned her over and I said to her, I whispered to her really, "It's just me and my mum. Are we a family?" And she said, "Of course you are." But I still remember, I was probably about 7. I still remember being unsure what to draw because I didn't have a house. I didn't have my dad anymore and I didn't have brothers or sisters. And I just thought everything that I knew about a family, there was more to it. And it felt sort of like me and my mum were just this double act. So I felt at that time in my life incomplete and really out of place. But I was living at my nan's, despite it being my nan and granda's house. It was always just called my nan's. And for it being a house where 12 were raised, it was too small for me. I remember there was no space for me in the house. I couldn't find a spot where I could just like be a kid, where I could like play and mess about. I couldn't like loiter anywhere. I was always in the way. The kitchen was like my nan's domain, and you could only go into the kitchen when you were having something to eat. Other than that, you had to get up and get out. And when you were having something to eat, you had about 10 minutes to wolf it down because there was always somebody else coming in to have something to eat. The living room was where my granddad would be parked, and he was retired at this stage, and he was deaf. So the stuff that he'd be watching, I wouldn't have been able to tolerate at a normal volume, but it was deafening. So I wouldn't be in the living room. The bedrooms were so small and cramped that really all you had was like a bed and a wardrobe, and that was it. And because it's Ireland, it'd be raining half the time. So the only place in the house that I could find where I wasn't in the way and I could sort of lose myself in my own imagination, playing with my toys or drawing or doing my homework, was on the stairs. And I lived at that house for about 6 years. And I would just park myself on the stairs all the time. And I can remember those stairs so clearly. It was right as you came in the door. So it was sort of this great little spot because you'd never know who's coming, but there was always somebody coming and going in the house. And you'd hear the footsteps going, the door would open, and it'd be like, surprise. It's like your Uncle Eric or your Aunt Deirdre, or it's your Uncle Tony or whatever. And they'd have to greet me like a doorman. I'd be sitting there, I'd be drawing, or I'd be building shoebox sets with my toys, and they'd have to get the lay of the land off me. It's like, is your nan here? Oh, she's in the kitchen. Where's your granddad? He's out in the back. Is your mum here? No, she's out. And it was a good way to sort of like have a little private moment with all of them as they slip in. And then as they're going, they'd sort of slip me a little bit of money, like £1 or whatever. Don't tell your mum, here's £1. For all those years, I used to sit there, and I can remember it so clearly. I remember that the stairs had a corner. The third step was bigger than the rest, that it was almost like a seat. And I could sit on the third step and lean on my right elbow and use the fourth and fifth step as like a desk, a place where I could write and play with my toys. And I remember that the beige carpet and how it was more worn at the bottom than it was at the top. And I can remember the skirting board and how it used to dig into my back if I didn't sort of angle myself in the right way. And I used to close the door to the living room and close the door to the hallway, and the whole house would get really quiet. And it was just really peaceful, and it was my sort of like sanctuary. And I used to really resent the fact that I didn't have my own space, but I had the stairs, and that's where you could find me. I used to have to share a bedroom with my uncle, and I was on the top bunk and he was on the bottom bunk. And my God, he used to fall asleep leaving the light on, and the light would be like a 100-watt bulb blaring down on top of me, and he would snore. And if I got out of the bed, I'd wake him up, and he had a stressful job at the time. And I remember I used to be just lying in that bed thinking, if I turn over too heavily, I'm going to trigger the landmine beneath me. He'd kill me now for saying this, but oh my God, we used to just be at war. It was not fun. But when I think back on it now and think about what my mom must have been dealing with, to have gone off to England to make a life for yourself and for it not to work out, and to be back living with your parents and your sister and your brother, and you're trying to raise a child. And of course, I didn't have anything to compare things to. I just knew what I used to have, which was I used to have my own bedroom, and I used to have a back garden, and I used to have friends over, and I used to be able to just like run amok and feel at home. No, I was sort of like on eggshells. And it wasn't that I wasn't wanted. It was just that it was not what I wanted. I lived there, like I say, for about 6 years, up until 1993. And my nan had a stroke. And it was a huge shock to everybody. And a lot was now having to change because the family had to care for my nan. She was now in a wheelchair. She was lucky to have survived that stroke. And I remember that it wasn't going to be practical for me to be living in the house as a 12-year-old at that stage with my nan, who was an invalid. And my granddad asked my mum to try and find somewhere to live. And she had been on the waiting list for a corporation place for years, and there was nothing for her. And so, I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but I don't know why. My mum took me out of school and we went to England. I left school on a Friday and I expected to be back on Monday, and I just never went back. And I think because my mum had to leave the country, we ended up getting a place. And we were able to come back a few months after we'd left. I'd gone to stay with my dad for a while, and suddenly, having lost my English accent, I was now in a school where the things that I was saying were now funny to English kids that I would say my school sack, or we'd go to the yard, and no, this was like backward talk to them. And so I felt really just like whiplash. It was going from one extreme to the next. But the reason I mention all that is because I never lived at my nan's house again after that. I'd go up to visit. But just recently, my aunt Brenda died, and she lived at that house all my life. And of course, my grandparents are gone now. And when I was up at the house just recently to see her before she died, we knew she was dying. The house was full. I tend to get overwhelmed. With just, if there's too much going on, I sort of need space to think, space to myself just for a second to catch my breath. And I found myself sitting back on the stairs, and not sitting on the third step as I used to, but sitting halfway up the stairs and like looking down on it and just remembering everything. I don't know how else to put it, but it's funny with memories. You sometimes end up becoming more fond of the things that you didn't like at the time because they remind you of that time. Like the song Barbie Girl by Aqua. I heard it again recently, and I hadn't heard that song in 20 years. And I just remember the song was inescapable at the time. And I just found myself smiling at the song because I used to just wince and I used to hate it. I was like, oh, Jesus, not again. But now it just reminded me of like where I was and walking up the hill up to my nan's and just the friends I had at the time. And yeah, you're grateful for the time capsule that they are. And I remember that I used to sit on those stairs and I used to wish that I could be anywhere else. That I just had to sit on the stairs and do my homework, and I'd have to pick up my copybooks and my bag, and I'd have to get out of the way when somebody's coming down the stairs or going up the stairs, or just feeling like I wish I was anywhere else. And now I'd love to be back there. I'd love to be back there as a kid, sitting on those stairs playing with my toys. So that's what came to me when you asked me about a memory. Like I said, my aunt died. She was the last person in that house. I don't think I'll ever go through that door again and pass those stairs. There's too many ghosts on that street. There's so many people no longer live there. And I had so many great memories from living in that house and sitting on those stairs.